The law of the forbidden cave. The village of Folktale was a place where dreams rarely came true. The people worked hard under the burning sun, toiling in the fields, yet still struggled to make ends meet. Among them was Jahi, a young man whose hands were calloused from years of labor, yet his pockets remained empty. He had once dreamed of a better life, but dreams did not fill empty stomachs or pay the debts that loomed over his family. One evening, as Jahi sat outside his small hut, staring at the stars, he heard a voice from the shadows. "Jahi, my old friend, have you forgotten me so soon?" Jahi turned, startled. Stepping into the dim torchlight was a figure he had not seen in years, Tunde, his childhood companion. But Tunde was different now. His clothes were rich and finely woven, his arms adorned with golden bracelets that gleamed even in the dim light. His boots, polished and sturdy, stood in stark contrast to Jahi's worn-out sandals. Jahi's eyes widened. "Tunde, is that really you?" Tunde laughed, the sound deep and confident. "It is I, brother. And look at me now. Life has changed for me." Jahi swallowed hard, jealousy creeping in. Where did you get all of this?" Tunde leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "A place deep in the jungle, beyond the rivers and hills. A cave, Jahi. A cave filled with gold beyond measure." Jahi frowned. "Gold? That's impossible. If such a place existed, everyone would know about it." Tunde smirked. "Oh, but they do know. They just fear it. There is a guardian, a serpent demon that protects the treasure. But I have been there, and I have returned richer than any man in this village." He lifted his hand, letting golden rings slide down his fingers. "What if I told you that together, we could outsmart the demon and claim the gold for ourselves?" Jahi hesitated. The weight of poverty had pressed upon him for too long, yet something about Tunde's words unsettled him. "And what of the others who have tried? Did they return?" Tunde's smile did not waver, but there was a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Some did. Some didn't. But Jahi, you and I are not like those fools. We are careful, we are clever." He placed a hand on Jahi's shoulder. "Would you rather spend your life in this village, working for scraps? Or take a risk and change your destiny forever?" Jahi's heart pounded. The promise of wealth, freedom, a better life, it was all within reach. But deep inside, something gnawed at him, a feeling he could not shake. That night, as he lay in bed, his mind restless, he had a dream. In it, an old woman, her eyes as dark as the night sky, stood before him. Her voice, like the rustling of dry leaves, warned, "Do not enter the cave, child. The gold is not a gift, it is a curse." Jahi awoke with a start, sweat beading on his forehead. He could still hear her voice echoing in his ears. But as the sun rose, the dream faded, and the hunger in his belly reminded him of the life he wished to escape. By midday, Jahi had made his choice. He met Tunde by the river, his few belongings slung over his shoulder. "Let's go," he said, pushing his fears aside. Tunde grinned, clapping him on the back. "Good choice, my friend. The jungle awaits." As they disappeared into the dense forest, neither of them noticed the silent eyes watching from the shadows, nor the whispers that stirred the trees. The jungle knew their fate, even if they did not, the journey into darkness. Jahi and Tunde set off at dawn, leaving the familiarity of the village behind. The path ahead was unforgiving, thick vines and towering trees created a canopy that blocked out the morning sun, casting eerie shadows over the jungle floor. Every step forward was a reminder that they were moving deeper into the unknown. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Birds screeched from the treetops, while unseen creatures rustled in the undergrowth. The deeper they traveled, the quieter the jungle became. Jahi wiped sweat from his brow. "Are you sure we are going the right way?" Tunde, walking ahead with confident strides, barely looked back. Of course. Trust me, Jahi. This is a shortcut. We will be rich by nightfall. But Jahi wasn't so sure. The dream of the old woman's warning still lingered in his mind. Something about this journey felt wrong. The first warning. By midday, they arrived at a small village nestled within the jungle. The villagers were wary of strangers, their eyes filled with suspicion. When Jahi and Tunde stopped to ask for water, an elderly man, with a long scar running across his face, approached them. "You are heading toward the cave, aren't you?" His voice was hoarse, yet firm. Tunde exchanged a glance with Jahi before nodding. "Yes, old man. We seek its treasure." The old man spat on the ground. "Fools." Jahi's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" The elder's eyes darkened. "The cave does not give, it only takes. Many have gone seeking riches. Some never return. The ones who do, are never the same." Tunde laughed, shaking his head. "More ghost stories. We are not afraid of old superstitions." The old man's expression did not change. "It is not ghosts you should fear. The serpent does not sleep. If you step into its domain, it will mark you." Jahi felt a chill crawl up his spine. The dream. The warnings. They were all telling him the same thing. "Turn back." He turned to Tunde. "Maybe we should." Tunde clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Ignore him, Jahi. These villagers tell stories to scare away outsiders. We are wasting time." The old man shook his head. "You have been warned." Jahi hesitated, but when Tunde began walking again, he had no choice but to follow. The river of shadows. Hours passed, and the jungle grew darker, even though the sun still hung in the sky. As they approached a narrow river, something felt off. The water was black, reflecting no light, and the air around it was eerily still. Tunde grabbed a fallen tree branch and tossed it into the river. Instead of floating, it sank immediately, disappearing into the darkness below. Jahi stepped back. "That's not normal." Tunde shrugged. "Then we swim quickly." Before Jahi could protest, Tunde had already stepped into the water, wading across with slow, deliberate movements. Jahi hesitated, his pulse quickening. Then, he heard something beneath the water. A deep, guttural hiss. "Tunde," Jahi started. Something moved beneath the surface. Jahi leapt forward, grabbing Tunde's arm just as a shadow shot up from the depths, long, dark, and writhing. Tunde yelled, kicking violently as the thing brushed against his leg. The moment his foot touched the riverbank, the shadow vanished, sinking back into the blackness. Both men panted, staring at the cursed river. Tunde forced a laugh, though his voice was shaky. "Just a fish." Jahi said nothing. "That was no fish." They continued in silence. The cave of no return. By nightfall, they reached the base of a rocky hill, where the entrance of the cave yawned like the mouth of a sleeping beast. An unnatural silence filled the air. Not a single insect chirped. Not a leaf rustled. The jungle, alive just moments ago, now felt dead. Jahi swallowed. "Tunde, I don't like this." Tunde took a step forward, running his hands over the strange carvings on the stone walls. Symbols etched in an ancient language, spirals that seemed to twist even though the stone was solid. The markings seemed to pause beneath Jahi's gaze. His head began to pound. "Come on," Tunde urged. "We are here now." Jahi hesitated, his legs refusing to move. His entire body screamed, "Do not enter." But then, the cave whispered his name. "Jahi." His blood turned cold. Tunde turned back, frowning. "Did you say something?" Jahi's breath hitched. "No." Another whisper, calling through the air like smoke. Tunde. Ton froze, his bravado cracking for the first time. Did you hear that? Jahi nodded, his mouth dry. Ton took a deep breath, forcing a grin. It's just the wind. There was no wind. With a final glance at Jahi, Ton stepped inside. Jahi's body screamed at him to run. But his feet carried him forward. As he crossed the threshold, the whispers grew louder, and the darkness swallowed them whole, betrayal in the shadows. The moment Jahi and Ton stepped into the cave, the air around them grew heavy, pressing against their chest like an unseen weight. The torches they carried flickered wildly, casting erratic shadows on the stone walls. Inside, the cave stretched into a vast, golden chamber. Piles of gold coins, precious gems, and ancient relics littered the cavern floor, shimmering under the dim light. Jewels the size of fists, golden crowns encrusted with emeralds, and delicate artifacts that seemed untouched by time lay before them, wealth beyond imagination. Jahi staggered back, overwhelmed by the sight. This was not natural. The old man's warning whispered through his mind. The cave does not give, it only takes. But Ton had no hesitation. With a greedy grin, he lunged forward, scooping gold coins into his sack. His fingers trembled with excitement as he grabbed an ornate golden dagger, his reflection shining in the polished blade. We are rich, Jahi. Ton's voice was almost delirious. Do you see? This is real. We've won. Jahi did not move. Something was wrong. The air trembled. A deep, guttural growl rumbled through the cavern, low and menacing. The walls shuddered as if the cave itself was waking from a long sleep. Ton froze, the gold slipping through his fingers. A shadow shifted in the darkness. Something massive was moving. From the depths of the cavern, a monstrous serpent demon emerged. The awakening of the serpent. The creature was unlike anything Jahi had ever seen. Its scales were black as night, reflecting no light, as if it absorbed the very shadows around it. Its eyes glowed with an eerie golden hue, ancient and unforgiving. When it spoke, its voice slithered through the air, sending shivers down Jahi's spine. Another thief, come to steal what is not his. Ton stumbled backward, his sack of gold spilling onto the floor. His hands trembled. We mean no harm, he stammered. The serpent's head tilted, amused. No harm, it hissed. And yet you come with greedy hands, taking without offering, stealing from my domain. Jahi felt his breath hitch. The serpent was looking straight at them, but somehow, its gaze pierced straight into his soul. Turned, realizing they were in danger, panicked. His eyes darted to the cave entrance, calculating his escape. Then, in one horrifying moment, Ton made his decision. He lunged at Jahi. Forgive me, brother. Before Jahi could react, Ton shoved him forward, sending him sprawling toward the serpent demon. Jahi hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him. He lifted his head just in time to see Ton grabbing as much gold as he could carry and running for the exit. Betrayed. Jahi's mind reeled. He had trusted Ton. He had followed him into this cursed place. And now, he was being left to die. The serpent laughed, a deep, hissing chuckle that echoed through the cavern. How predictable. The cave closes. As Ton sprinted toward the entrance, something shifted. The cave rumbled, the walls quaking. The exit began to close. Ton's footsteps faltered. No, no, no. The last thing Jahi saw before the darkness swallowed him was Ton's silhouette vanishing behind the collapsing stone. Then, silence. Jahi was trapped. He scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. He turned in every direction, but there was no way out. The serpent loomed over him, its golden eyes glowing in the shadows. You were meant to be a sacrifice, it hissed, coiling closer. But I see something different in you. Jahi swallowed hard, his body shaking. Please, he whispered. I didn't come here for greed. The serpent watched him, its massive body shifting through the piles of gold. No, it mused. You did not. And that is why I have not devoured you yet. Jahi's breath came fast, his mind racing. He had seen what the serpent did to those it considered thieves. Why was he still alive? The creature's eyes narrowed, studying him. Tell me, human, it murmured. Do you wish to live? Jahi did not hesitate. Yes. The serpent's lips curled into what could have been a smile. Then you will listen carefully. The curse and the escape. Jahi stood frozen as the serpent demon coiled around him, its golden eyes gleaming in the dim torchlight. Every breath he took felt heavier, as if the very air inside the cave was pressing down on him. He braced for the fatal strike, for the fangs to sink into his flesh and end his life in this cursed place. But the serpent did not attack. Instead, it laughed. A deep, echoing chuckle, vibrating through the cavern walls, shaking the piles of gold and jewels around him. I will not devour you, Jahi. Jahi's knees nearly buckled at the sound of his own name from the creature's lips. I have a different fate for you. The serpent slithered closer, its immense body shifting over the treasure. Jahi tried to step back, but there was nowhere to run. You are bound to me now, the serpent hissed. You will never be free, unless you bring me another soul in your place. Jahi's breath hitched. No, he gasped. I won't do it. I won't sacrifice another for my freedom. The serpent merely smiled, its fangs glinting. You will, Jahi. It lowered its head until its massive face was inches from his. Because one day, desperation will consume you. A searing pain shot through Jahi's chest. He cried out, clutching his heart as a strange symbol burned into his skin. It was not fire, not ice, but something deeper, something ancient, as though the cave itself had reached into his soul and branded him. Jahi collapsed to his knees, panting. The pain faded, but something inside him felt wrong, as if a part of him no longer belonged to himself. The serpent reared back, satisfied. Go now, child. And remember, when the time comes, you will hear my voice. Before Jahi could respond, the ground beneath him shifted. A great force pulled him backward, like the cave itself was spitting him out. The last thing he saw was the serpent watching him, its golden eyes filled with knowing amusement. Then, everything went black. The return to the world. Jahi awoke with a gasp, his body jerking upright. The warm jungle air filled his lungs, the scent of damp earth replacing the stale darkness of the cave. He was outside. His hands trembled as he touched his chest, feeling the strange mark burned into his skin. It was real. But the cave, where was it? Jahi spun around, searching for the entrance, but the place he had just emerged from was now nothing more than a solid rock wall. As if the cave had vanished from existence. The realization hit him like a fist to the gut. Tunde was gone. Jahi stumbled forward, his body weak, his mind racing. Had Tunde really escaped? Had he taken the gold and left him to die? The betrayal burned deeper than the curse. For hours, he wandered through the jungle, fighting against the twisting vines and sharp thorns. His body was drained, yet something kept pushing him forward, as if the curse itself was forcing him toward home. By the time he reached the village, the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of blood and fire. But as he stepped onto the dusty road, something was wrong. A changed man, a cursed soul. The moment Jahi entered the village, people stopped what they were doing. Women hushed their children. Men backed away. Even the village dogs whimpered and ran. Jahi frowned. It's me, he called out, his voice hoarse. I'm back. But no one moved closer. Instead, they stared at him with wide, fearful eyes, whispering among themselves. Something is different about him. He smells of death. Look at his eyes, he is not the same. Jahi felt it too. A darkness lingered inside him, something cold and unnatural. He could still feel the cave, still hear the whispers in the wind. He grabbed the nearest man by the shoulders. "Where is Tunde?" he demanded. The man flinched, shaking his head. "Gone. He returned yesterday, carrying sacks of gold. He left before sunrise. He said you were dead." Jahi felt his stomach drop. Tunde had abandoned him. Left him to die. Taken the gold and run. Rage bubbled inside him, but it was a cold rage, laced with something deeper. Something not entirely his own. Then, that night, the whispers began. The voice in the dark. Jahi barely slept. Each time he closed his eyes, the jungle seemed to breathe around him. His heart felt too small, the walls pressing in. Then, just as he was drifting off, "Jahi!" His eyes snapped open. The voice was not human. It slithered through the air, low and velvety, curling around his ears like smoke. "Bring me another." Jahi sat bolt upright, his chest heaving. His fingers dug into the thin straw mat beneath him. He was alone, yet he wasn't. The voice was inside him now. It lived in him, just as the serpent had promised. Jahi shook his head violently. "No." A soft chuckle. "Not yet." The voice faded, but the mark on his chest burned, pulsing with the serpent's presence. Jahi clutched his heart, his breath uneven. He knew now. This curse was real. And worse, it was only beginning. A life falling apart. The curse did not take Jahi's life. It took everything around him. The months that followed his escape from the cave were filled with misery and loss. At first, he tried to ignore the whispers, tried to live as though nothing had changed. But the village never forgot. His presence brought an unnatural stillness wherever he walked. Conversations stopped when he entered a room. Friends and neighbors averted their eyes, whispering about the mark on his soul. Then the misfortunes began. Jahi's crops withered overnight, despite the rains. His goats fell sick, their bodies trembling before they died in silence. His mother's health declined, her once strong body growing frail. The village healer said it was a sickness of the spirit, not the flesh. He knew why. The curse was tightening around him. And every night, as he lay awake in his hut, the serpent's voice slithered into his ears. "Bring me another." Jahi resisted. He was not a killer. But as the days passed, as hunger gnawed at his belly, as the village's rejection became unbearable, his resolve weakened. Then, one night, as he sat outside his hut, staring at the black sky, he heard footsteps approaching. A familiar voice. "Jahi." He turned sharply. Standing before him, dressed in silk robes and gold rings, was Tunde. The price of betrayal. Jahi rose to his feet, his hands clenching into fist. "Tunde," he spat the name like poison. Tunde smiled, but his eyes were hollow. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something haunted, broken. "I thought you were dead," Jahi said, his voice low. Tunde let out a bitter laugh. "No, my friend. But I wish I was." Jahi stiffened. Tunde took a step closer. "I have worth now, Jahi. More than I ever dreamed. But I have no peace." Jahi narrowed his eyes. "You left me to die. And now you want sympathy." Tunde's expression darkened. He looked over his shoulder, as if expecting something to follow him. Then, in a whisper, he said, "I see it, Jahi. Everywhere I go. The serpent's eyes. Watching me." Jahi felt a chill creep over his skin. "I thought escaping the cave with gold would make me free," Tunde continued, his voice unsteady. But I was wrong. The demon follows me in my dreams, my reflection, my shadow. No matter where I run, it is there. Jahi exhaled slowly. You are cursed, too. Tunde nodded. I thought I could spend my way out of it. I traveled to distant lands, I built houses, I drowned myself in luxury, but the curse cannot be escaped. A heavy silence fell between them. Then Tunde spoke again. There is only one way to break this suffering, he said. Jahi already knew what he would say next. We must return to the cave. The journey back to darkness. Jahi wanted to refuse. Every part of him screamed not to go back. But the serpent had already bound them both. If this was the only way to break the curse, he had no choice. So, against his better judgment, he agreed. The next morning, they set off together, much like before, but this time, there was no excitement, no hope. Only fear. The jungle felt different. It was as if the trees knew where they were going, as if the wind carried whispers from the cave itself. As the hours passed, Tunde spoke less and less. He seemed distracted, his gaze flicking to the shadows between the trees. Jahi noticed something, too. The closer they got, the heavier the air became. His limbs felt like they were moving through water. The mark on his chest burned hotter. Then, just before sundown, they reached the Black River. The same cursed waters that had almost swallowed them last time. But now, the river was still, unnaturally still. The water reflected nothing. Tunde hesitated. Do you feel that? Jahi nodded. The jungle was holding its breath. Neither of them spoke as they crossed. On the other side, the cave entrance stood before them, unchanged, untouched. As if it had been waiting. The serpent awaits. The moment they stepped inside, the whispers returned. Soft at first. Then growing. Jahi, you have returned. Jahi gritted his teeth, forcing himself forward. Tunde's breathing was shallow beside him. The walls paused. The gold glowed faintly, calling to them like an old song. Then, out of the shadows, the serpent emerged. Its golden eyes fixed on them both. You have learned, haven't you? The demon hissed, its voice calling through the cavern. Greed cannot set you free. Gold cannot lift your curse. Tunde trembled. Then what will, he demanded. The serpent smiled, its massive coils shifting over the treasure. You already know the answer. Jahi's stomach tightened. The demon's golden eyes burned into him. One must stay. One must go free. Silence. Tunde's breathing hitched. Jahi felt his hands turn to ice. The cave was not letting them both go. One of them would not live alive. The serpent's forked tongue flicked out. Choose. A twist of fate. The serpent demon loomed in the shadows, its golden eyes gleaming with amusement as it watched Jahi and Tunde stand before it. You have returned, the creature hissed, its voice like a whisper of wind through ancient stone. Jahi stood rigid, his breath shallow. The weight of the moment pressed on his chest like a boulder. He had no illusions, there would be no easy escape this time. Beside him, Tunde straightened his shoulders, his face twitching with desperation. He had always been a man who believed he could charm or outmaneuver any situation. Even now, he thought he could strike a deal. Great Serpent, Tunde began, forcing confidence into his voice. Surely, we can come to an agreement. The serpent's head tilted slightly. Tunde licked his lips, glancing toward Jahi. I offer you another sacrifice, he said, stepping forward. Let me go, and I will bring you someone else. Someone better. Stronger. A leader. A chief. Jahi's stomach churned. Even now, even after all this, Tunde was still trying to trade lives for his own survival. The serpent's mouth curled in a slow, deliberate grin. Another sacrifice, it echoed, tasting the words as if they were foreign. Then, its golden eyes darkened. The cave suddenly shook violently, the tremors knocking Jahi and turned off balance. The air grew thick, pulsing with something unseen. Fools, the serpent roared, its voice no longer calm and slithering but thunderous, shaking the cavern. Tunde staggered back, his face losing color. What? The serpent lunged forward, its massive body coiling tighter around the cavern. Did you truly believe this was about gold? The demon hissed. Jahi's pulse pounded. The curse was never about the treasure. It was never meant to be taken. Tunde's hands trembled. No, 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 I brought the gold back, I. The serpent's laughter rumbled. The gold was never yours. And now, you must pay the price. The cave collapsed inward, the ground splitting beneath Tunde's feet. He screamed, scrambling for balance. Jahi, help me. But there was nothing Jahi could do. The serpent struck, its massive jaws engulfing Tunde whole before he could even fight back. For a brief moment, Jahi saw Tunde's eyes, wide, full of terror, finally understanding. Then he was gone. Swallowed. Silence. The cave stopped shaking. Jahi stood there, his heart racing, his body frozen. The serpent slowly turned its golden gaze to him. And now, you, it said. A final task. Jahi braced himself, expecting his fate to follow Tunde's. But the serpent did not attack. Instead, it studied him with an ancient, knowing gaze. You understand now, don't you? Jahi swallowed hard. Yes, he whispered. The treasure, it was never a gift. It was never meant to be taken. It was a test. The curse was not about punishing greed with gold, but punishing those who refused to let go of it. Tunde had been marked from the moment he stole it. His fate had been sealed by his own actions. Jahi took a deep, shaky breath. What do you want from me? The serpent shifted, lowering its massive head until its eyes were level with Jahi's. Return the gold to the earth, and your curse will be lifted. Jahi's heart pounded. He hesitated, but only for a moment. Then, without another word, he knelt down and began to walk. Burying the past. Jahi dug into the cold earth with his bare hands, his fingers scraping against rock and dirt as he buried each coin, each gem, each stolen piece of treasure. The process felt endless, the weight of each piece heavier than before. But he did not stop. The serpent watched in silence, its presence filling the cave. And then, when the last coin was covered, the darkness lifted. The whispers faded. The cave exhaled, releasing him. Jahi gasped as he felt the mark on his chest bump one last time, and then, just like that, it was gone. The serpent's voice came one final time, softer now. You are free. And then, Jahi was outside. Freedom at last. The jungle was brighter, the air lighter. Jahi looked down at his hands, expecting to feel the weight of the curse, but there was nothing. For the first time in months, he felt truly free. He looked back at the cave, expecting to see its dark entrance. But it was gone. Vanished. The cave had taken what it was owed and had disappeared forever. Jahi turned toward the village, his heart pounding with newfound purpose. He would tell no one about what had happened. But the legend would live on, a warning to those who sought riches beyond their worth. Not all gold was a gift. Not all treasure was meant to be taken. And some prices were too high to pay. As Jahi walked away, the wind carried the whispers of a legend that would never be forgotten. The end.